Led Zeppelin were an English rock band formed in London in 1968. The group comprised vocalist Robert Plant, guitarist Jimmy Page, bassist and keyboardist John Paul Jones, and drummer John Bonham. With a heavy, guitar-driven sound, they are cited as one of the progenitors of hard rock and heavy metal, although their style drew from a variety of influences including blues and folk music. Led Zeppelin have been credited as significantly impacting the nature of the music industry, particularly in the development of album-oriented rock and stadium rock. Rolling Stone magazine described them as the heaviest band of all time, the biggest band of the 70s, and unquestionably one of the most enduring bands in rock history. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995. The museum's biography of the band states that they were as influential during the 1970s as the Beatles were during the 1960s. Let's take a look at where their story began. Led Zeppelin's roots can be traced back to another band by the name of the Yardbirds, which notably featured both Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck on guitar at one point. The blues rock group found success in the mid-60s. They would often perform songs that would later be developed and released with Led Zeppelin. Knowing That I'm Losing You later being re-recorded as Tangerine is perhaps the most prominent example. The Yardbirds played their final gig in 1968 before separating, with members breaking off to pursue their own musical projects. Page was keen to continue the project and, with some concerts scheduled in Scandinavia, was tasked with finding new band members. One of the first personnel changes was the recruitment of Peter Grant, the imposing and shrewd music manager that would work with Led Zeppelin from their creation to their breakup. Grant fully supported Page's ambition, in particular his desire to focus on an album format approach rather than pop singles that were all the rage at the time thanks to the Beatles. The first role to be filled was that of vocalist. Page approached a handful of candidates, and although he was rejected, he was recommended a 19-year-old from the Midlands by the name of Robert Plant. Page recounts the first time he saw Plant perform. They were playing at a teachers' training college outside of Birmingham to an audience of about 12 people. Page recalled in the Led Zeppelin oral history, Trampled Underfoot. Robert was fantastic, and having heard him that night and having listened to a demo he had given me, I realised that without a doubt his voice had an exceptional and very distinctive quality. Plant was on board, and the next to be folded in was John Bonham, a drummer with a romping, bombastic playing style. The final piece was John Paul Jones, who, at the insistence of his wife, reached out to Page to see if he could join. Page and Jones had played together in the past, so it was an easy decision to make, and the lineup was locked in. Before leaving for Scandinavia, the group was the backing band in a recording session for a PJ Proby track entitled Jim's Blues, which marks the first time all 4 future members of Led Zeppelin appear together in a studio recording, and you can already hear their trademark sound. Under the moniker The New Yardbirds, Plant, Page, Bonham and Jones played in Gladsaxe, Denmark. It was the first of a handful of dates in Scandinavia which were very well received. The moment that they got back to London, Page rushed the band into the studio to record their debut record, hoping to ride the wave of their Scandi tour. It's here we see for the first time Page taking up the role as the driving force of the group, both in vision and practice. As he mentions in the book Conversations with Jimmy Page, I wanted artistic control and a vice grip because I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the band. Their debut album was recorded and mixed in just 9 days, with Jimmy Page covering all the costs. The guitarist not only wrote all the music for the album but also spearheaded the production process, implementing a variety of techniques in his pursuit of a specific sound. He relied heavily on the natural room ambience to enhance the reverb and recording texture on the record, looking to capture the space by placing microphones close to amplifiers and drums but also much further away, and then balance the two in the mix. Once the album was completed, the band were pressured by previous Yardbirds members to change their name. Page tells the story of how it was Keith Moon of The Who that originally suggested the name Led Zeppelin, joking that the band would go down like a lead balloon. The group took to the idea and decided to drop the A from lead to avoid mispronunciations. With the music and name locked in, music manager Peter Grant approached Atlantic Records and secured an advance contract of $143,000, just over $1.2 million today, the biggest deal of its kind for a new band. The eponymous debut LP was released in January 1969 and peaked at number 10 on the Billboard chart. The record was lightning in a bottle. It boasted a series of hits like Good Times, Bad Times, Dazed and Confused, and Babe I'm Gonna Leave You. It was a deceptively intellectual album that simultaneously borrowed and eschewed from rock and blues traditions. The group balanced romping rock jams like Communication Breakdown with the soft sincerity of Babe I'm Gonna Leave You. The album also provided ample space for every band member, each an iconic rock persona in their own way, to present themselves to the world. Robert Plant's dynamic vocal range, John Bonham's game-changing drumming, Jimmy Page's rip-roaring guitar, and John Paul Jones's technical control of the bass demonstrated the group were fantastically skilled musicians who left their mark on people hearing them for the first time. In his article for The New Yorker, James Wood recalls hearing Plant's voice for the first time, saying, "Where was Robert Plant's voice from? This bluesy banshee sounded like no other white man in rock and roll." Decades later, it's still one of those voices, like Lou Reed's, James Brown's, David Byrne's, Kate Bush's, which encode a whole strange world. When the album was first released, critics didn't look favourably on it. One of the most recurring and prominent critiques was that the group was derivative and guilty of cultural appropriation and plagiarism. Robert Plant speaks to this in an interview in 2012.
When did the critics take notice?
Well, they didn't like us at all.
No.
No. I don't think they understood what we were doing.
Well, and also there's a reverential thing about white kids playing blues. And we came along and we mutilated the blues and twisted it upside down. And I guess it was considered to be bad taste too, you know. I think there was a feeling that we were slightly precocious and not sticking to the act, trying to emulate what it was in the first place. And the worst thing in the world with music is to keep it going identical forever and ever.
It was Led Zeppelin's intention from the start to subvert genre norms, to take blues tracks and completely reshape them so you could barely tell they were the same track. A couple of the songs on the track list are Willie Dixon covers, and you can hear there's a canyon of difference.
You shook me all night long. You shook me all night long. But I got to put you down. So I'm gonna put you down for a while.
James Wood outlines in the same New Yorker article that Page had no intention of being imprisoned by the blues. He wanted to treat them with a strange and never previously attempted alloy of hard rock and acoustic folk, acoustic alternating with electric, quiet verses and hard choruses. Many of the best known Led Zeppelin songs like Babe I'm Gonna Leave You, Ramble On and Stairway to Heaven adhere to a sort of velvet followed by fist form. Bob Spitz puts it well when he says that Led Zeppelin claimed new musical territory by narrowing the distance between genres. Critics also jabbed at the producing and songwriting ability of Page as well as Plant's singing. The negative reviews marked the beginning of a difficult relationship between the band and the press, as they would avoid talking to them throughout their career. But despite poor critical reception, the album was a massive commercial and cultural hit.
It's cool, it's groovy, it's #1, the Led Zeppelin.
The band embarked on a US tour and word soon got out about their phenomenal live performances, which only helped album sales and their rise in popularity. Although the band released their debut album in January 1969, by October they had already released their second, Led Zeppelin II. Page was once again key in the recording process and was given sole producer credit for the record. It's seen by some as one of the band's heaviest albums and is a mix of 6 originals and another 3 reinterpretations of blues songs by Willie Dixon and Howlin' Wolf. The album featured some of the band's most well-known tracks like Whole Lotta Love, which they performed at every gig from June 1969 onwards, and was the last song the group ever performed live. It's praised as one of the definitive tracks of the genre and era. Moby Dick is a dazzling, jaw-dropping showcase of John Bonham's ability on the drum kit, as it was essentially an extended drum solo which featured him playing with his hands, playing percussion, and in later performances even electronic drum kits. The group's second release was once again not well received by contemporary music critics, with Rolling Stone seeming to have a vendetta against the band as they write. Until you've listened to the album 800 times, as I have, it seems as if it's just one especially heavy song extended over the space of 2 whole sides. Much like their first release, however, the album was a commercial and cultural success, as it reached #1 in the charts in the UK and US, even knocking the Beatles' Abbey Road from top spot. In 1999, it was certified 12 times platinum and has since been cited as one of the greatest and most influential albums of all time. The album's success can be attributed to the band's marketing and promotional strategy, which included the reluctance to release singles. They viewed their albums as complete, holistic works and didn't want to chop them up, much to the dismay of record labels. They also avoided television appearances and encouraged fans to come and see them play live. This was also helped by the reputation their live performances garnered. They were said to be stuff of legend, a singular life experience experience not to be missed. Some early Zeppelin concerts were said to last more than 4 hours, with expanded and improvised versions of songs. It was during this period of intensive concert touring that the band also developed a reputation for offstage excess.
I don't think we ever managed to supply the demand. If we're talking about concerts, we always sold out, and we were always doing multiples in cities, but then we'd have to be moving on. That's it. We always had full attendance everywhere, and from the early days, those very early humble days, in say '69, when we were really touring and establishing from one coast to the other, from the west coast to the east. I mean, that was it. In a matter of months, we were really established. But the people just kept wanting to come and see us, you know, more and more and more in droves.
After a relentless period of touring and rocketing to stardom, Page and Plant retired to rural Wales, and it was there, in a cottage named Bron y Awr, that they began work on the band's third album. The remote setting had no running water or electricity, which encouraged the duo to adopt a more acoustic sound during the writing process, which can be heard in the final recording. Although it was only Page and Plant who were present at this retreat, the ideas and compositions would be workshopped and developed by all 4 members later on, as reflected by the more democratic songwriting credits for this album, a first for the band. Circumstance helped facilitate a change in musical direction, which was always in Page and Plant's mind. They wanted to continue reshaping the band's sound, which saw folk and Celtic flavours being folded into the compositions, as well as Jones dabbling with a variety of keyboards and string instruments, including synthesizers, mandolin and double bass, as well as his usual bass guitar. The folk influence is most evident on a track like That's the Way, a rare acoustic Zeppelin track that highlights their versatility.
I can play with you no more.
The album also featured one of the band's most iconic tracks, Immigrant Song, written about the Viking invasions of England and inspired by a short tour of Iceland in June 1970. One of my favourite Zeppelin tracks, it's a brutal, driving hard rock track that's become rooted in pop culture, and if you want a killer calf workout, try to follow Bonham's bass drum pattern throughout the song. By now, Led Zeppelin releases were all received in similar ways, shunned by critics and adored by fans. The former was so bad that Page said that the negative press given to the third album affected him so much that he did not give press interviews for 18 months after its release. People were surprised by the new acoustic sound, but the album soared to the top of both UK and US charts, propelling them to newfound cultural heights. They were rapidly becoming icons of that era, and the divine mystique surrounding them continued to grow as they donned flamboyant glitter attire and incorporated dazzling elements like lasers, light shows and mirror balls into their electrifying live performances. They also began travelling in a private jet airliner nicknamed the Starship, rented out entire sections of hotels, and would frequently appear in the papers for rock star shenanigans, including a story of Bonham riding a motorcycle through the floor of a hotel. Led Zeppelin released their 4th album on the 8th of November 1971. They returned to Bron y Awr to write new material, and in response to negative press feedback on the previous record, they decided to release the album with no name or information on it. As such, the album is often referred to as Led Zeppelin 4, Untitled or Zoso, which was one of 4 symbols that each band member contributed to the cover, all of which have since become key parts of Led Zeppelin imagery. The album was a mixture of the band's 3 biggest stylistic profiles, reinterpreted blues, folk or folk-inspired numbers, and obviously their hot and heavy brand of rock or heavy metal as it's been referred to, much to the dislike of the members. When the Levee Breaks is a cover of a Memphis Minnie and Kansas Joe track released in 1929, it's another example of the band taking an old-timey blues number and reshaping it so it fits into the music culture of early 70s heavy rock. The song begins with Bonham's huge unaccompanied drums, the snare and bass drum really filling the spectrum. It's one of my personal favourites, and comparing it to the original gives an insight into the intuitive imagination they had when adapting it.
If it keeps on raining, love is going to break. If it keeps on raining, love is going to break. If it keeps on raining.
The album also features one of music's most iconic compositions, Stairway to Heaven. Divided into 3 sections, each one growing in tempo and volume, the song has flavours of prog rock, hard rock and folk music all mixed in, and features both acoustic and electronic instruments. It's an impressive and enduring piece that was also reputedly the most requested and played song on American radio in the 1970s. It also sparked a copyright lawsuit which Zeppelin ultimately won.
Yes, there are 2 paths you can go by, but in the long run.
Led Zeppelin 4 was released to huge acclaim. It was number 1 on the UK charts for 90 weeks. It was the band's best-selling album in the US and is one of the best-selling albums in history. It was the band's crowning glory and cemented their status as superstars. Established music critic Robert Christgau regarded it as the definitive Led Zeppelin album, with other critics calling it a masterpiece, a powerhouse, and a monolithic cornerstone of heavy rock. After releasing 4 albums in the space of 3 years, the band would tour 4 different continents from 1971 to 1973. Led Zeppelin's 5th album, Houses of the Holy, was released in March 1973. Like the previous album, neither the band's name nor the album title was printed on the sleeve. Houses of the Holy isn't as weighty or hard-edged as their earlier music, it's cleaner and broader, the tones a little bit brighter. It's also one of the group's most stylistically eclectic, with the band sprinkling in some new and surprising genres into their sound, including funk and reggae. Dire Maker is a combination of reggae dub traditions and 50s doo-wop, and Crunge was a James Brown-inspired funk number. Neither track was particularly well received by critics or fans at the time, but it speaks to the group's stylistic open-mindedness. Despite the music itself not being the group's best and receiving critical review of being dull and confusing, the subsequent US tour in 1973 broke records for attendance as they sold out stadiums and arenas across the country. At Tampa Stadium in Florida, they played to over 56,000 fans, breaking the record set by the Beatles' 1965 Shea Stadium concert. 3 sold-out shows at Madison Square Garden in New York City were filmed for a film that would be released in 1976, which was named after the opening track of the album. The song remains the same.
I think they were very relaxed with themselves and happy to turn themselves on. The fact that the audiences were with them, was really evident. The critics weren't. I think Houses didn't go down too well in certain areas. It came out in the spring of '73, just as though they're about to go on tour in America, which proved to be their most amazing tour so far. 66 dates, I think it was, sold out everywhere, finished with the 3 days in Madison Square Garden. It was the point where Led Zeppelin elevated from being a mere rock band, particularly in America, to being a global sensation, and I think that is the point where it really begins to go real mega.
While a record-breaking amount of people flocked to see Led Zeppelin, their shrewd manager Peter Grant ensured that they were maximizing revenue. As James Wood discusses, Grant wouldn't let them make television appearances, so if people wanted to see Led Zeppelin, they had to pay to go to the concerts. And in a move that forever changed the rock concert business, he forced promoters to give the band 90% of the gate, take it or leave it, and they took it. Of course, with such a relentless and intense lifestyle, it was almost inevitable that the band would begin to feel the weight of stardom. As Wood continues, drugs followed the money. Grant was a coke addict by 1972, he helped himself to bags of the stuff. Jimmy Page soon caught up and eventually added heroin. Although Page's addiction appears to have turned him sleepy and sloppy, benignly vampiric, he slept during the day and palely loitered at night. Drugs and alcohol made Bonham seemingly sweet-natured when sober, an energetic monster. At one point he bit a woman's finger for no apparent reason, drawing blood. On the overnight train to Osaka, he drank himself silly again, and while Jimmy Page and his Japanese girlfriend were in the dining car, Bonzo found her bag and shit in it. These are just a handful of anecdotes you can find about the band during this period, all stories rooted in drug abuse and wits unravelling. It was also around this time that Page, 28 at the time, began his controversial relationship with 13-year-old Laurie Mattix. In 1974, Led Zeppelin formed their own music label. Houses of the Holy was the last release they did with Atlantic, so they set up Swan Song Records. The label's logo is another iconic piece of Led Zeppelin imagery that would appear on countless t-shirts and merchandise over the years. Their first release with Swan Song Records was their 6th album, Physical Graffiti. It consists of 15 songs to form a double album, although there was originally enough material to cover 3 LPs. Zeppelin were typically varied in their approach to the album's sound. Their staple hard rock energy can be heard on Sick Again. The Eastern-influenced orchestral rock classic Kashmir was hugely popular, and you also had prog rock, funk, acoustic, rock and roll, ballads, blues, and soft rock present as well. One of the highlight tracks in My Time of Dying is a reinterpretation of a gospel song by Blind Willie Johnson. It's an 11-minute juggernaut that was largely recorded live, with Bonham taking the lead with arrangements and structures. A very different energy is felt in the driving jam track Trampled Underfoot, in which Jones plays the clavinet. It went on to be a very popular live piece and was played at every show from 1975 onwards. The aforementioned Kashmir was one of the most ambitious tracks on the album, which was conceived by Page and Bonham, with Jones playing mellotron and arranging strings and brass parts that were performed by session musicians. Like Trampled Underfoot, this would be a staple for all their future live performances. There was such anticipation and excitement ahead of the record's release that it was the first album to go platinum on advance orders alone. When it did release, all previous Zeppelin albums re-entered the top 200 chart. They were a cultural and musical phenomenon and soon embarked on another North American tour which employed increasingly developed sound and lighting systems. The band sold out 3 nights at Earls Court Arena in London, the largest arena in Britain at the time. The tickets for the shows sold out within 4 hours, described by the promoter as an unprecedented demand in the history of rock music. So 2 more nights were added, which also sold out. Critics at the time looked favourably on the release, calling it a tour de force with the band at their creative peak, and some journalists saying that it was their Sgt. Pepper. However, some retrospective critics remarked that in the larger context of the band's body of work, there's a marked decline in music. If you compare the raw vitality of early tracks to ones on Physical Graffiti, it's indicative of a group heading downhill. Perhaps this point of view was substantiated with the hindsight knowledge of the band's raucousness being publicly available. In Lisa Robinson's Vanity Fair article, she shares a bizarre incident where the band's tour manager, Richard Cole, pulled a gun out on a plane in the middle of an argument. January 31st, 1975, New York City to Detroit. Jimmy started yelling about the way he, a reporter, had voted in the last election. Someone threw a drink at the reporter and a scuffle ensued. The reporter got more belligerent. All of a sudden, Richard Cole stood in the aisle holding a gun. I had never seen a gun before. We were 25,000 feet in the air. I cowered in my seat, nervous glances all around. Silence. 2 of the band's security guards, off-duty policemen, walked over and stood next to Richard. For Christ's sake, Bonzo yelled from the front of the plane, "Will you all shut up? I'm trying to get some sleep." In the wake of their eminent Earls Court concerts, Led Zeppelin's next expected concerts in San Francisco had to be cancelled as Plant and his wife were involved in a serious car injury while on holiday in Greece. In order to remain tax exiles from the UK, the band members needed to limit their time in the country, so they convened in California, where a lot of the material for the next album, Presence, was written. The recording and release process for the album was less than ideal. Plant's injury recovery was lengthy and not only meant he had to record his vocals from a wheelchair, but the band were unable to tour the album as he was still recuperating. On top of that, the whole recording process was extremely rushed as the group booked the studio directly before the Rolling Stones. Page agreed with the Stones to use 2 of their recording days to allow for the completion of the album. Page and engineer Keith Harwood then worked on the mixes almost all day, with Page later saying they worked around 18 to 20 hours every day during the process. Musically, the album saw the group returning to their roots, with a lot of the tracks being guitar-based rock as they dispensed with folky ballads and complex compositions. Unlike other Zeppelin albums, no keyboards and very little acoustic guitar are present. The 10-minute opener Achilles' Last Stand is one of the standout cuts from the record, showcasing the group's Eastern influences and impressive songwriting skills. When the album was released, it was already certified gold in the UK based on advance orders alone. Despite this, it was actually the group's lowest selling album and, as always, received mixed reviews from critics as they branded it blunted and rushed. Led Zeppelin biographer Dave Lewis remarks, "The direct, hard-hitting nature of the 7 recordings failed to connect with a fan base more accustomed to the diversity and experimental edge of their previous work." At this point in time, Led Zeppelin were the premium rock attraction in the world, having eclipsed even the Rolling Stones. They set yet another attendance record with an audience of over 76,000 people at their Silverdome concert on the 30th of April. According to the Guinness Book of Records, it was the largest attendance to that date for a single act show. Yet the performance and quality of Presence, along with various news stories, made many people wonder if the band's excesses may have caught up with them. Wood summarizes this dark period. "It all went properly rancid during the tours of 1975 and 77. Page was lost to drugs, Bonham was uncontrollable, the shows were hazardous, gigantic, brilliant, careless. Page seemed not to notice or care that his guitar was out of tune. In 1975, Bonham played the drums with a bag of coke between his legs. In 1977, he fell asleep over his kit. The Detroit Free Press called the fans the most violent, unruly crowds ever to inflict themselves upon a concert hall." In Oakland in July 1977, Bonham, Cole and Grant seriously assaulted a colleague of the promoter Bill Graham and were arrested. Led Zeppelin never played in America again. Only 2 weeks after the devastating Oakland incident, more bad news arrived for the band, as Robinson explains. As the band checked into the Maison du Puy Hotel in New Orleans, Robert got a phone call at the front desk, took it upstairs in his room, and was told that after being rushed to the hospital with a mysterious respiratory infection, his 5-year-old son, Karak, had died. Robert, accompanied by Richard Bonzo and assistant Dennis Sheehan, immediately flew back to England. The US tour, a tour marked by increasing turmoil, tension, drug use, violence, and estrangement among band members, was over. Robert, devastated by his son's death, and reportedly upset too that Jimmy and Peter had not attended the funeral, went into seclusion. Over the span of 3 weeks, the group recorded In Through the Outdoor in ABBA's Polar Studios in Stockholm. The album's title comes from the difficulty the band encountered getting back into the public mind in the UK given their tax exile status, so it was like trying to get in through the outdoor. John Paul Jones established himself as the creative force behind this album, as Bonham's alcoholism and Page's heroin addiction were compromising their ability to contribute. It's said that Plant and Jones would work on the songs during the day and Page and Bonham would add their parts late at night. The highlight track, In the Evening, opens with a surreal soundscape, which Page explains was achieved by playing his guitar with a violin bow and using a gizmotron effect. Jones's interest and proclivity with synthesizers meant that there was a lot of sonic experimentation on the album, which drew mixed reactions, but the release itself caused the entire Zeppelin catalogue to re-enter the charts, much like what happened with Physical Graffiti. It was released at a very transitional point in time for music, as tastes and technologies were evolving. Some people found the album's synthesizer-influenced music inevitable given the direction of popular music, but traditionalists wanted more heavy rock. In any case, Led Zeppelin now had to contend with new and exciting acts like The Clash, The Police, Talking Heads, Joy Division, and the Sex Pistols. In August 1979, Led Zeppelin played 2 landmark shows at Nebworth Festival, the band's first concert on UK soil in 4 years, with a combined audience of over 300,000 people. According to the official website of Nebworth House, the festival involved the largest stage ever constructed, 570 loose seats, 750 feet of urinals, and the biggest rock band in the world. Led Zeppelin played their last ever concert in the UK at Nebworth, and it was the end of an era for the Nebworth shows. Both concerts overran, noise complaints were received from 7 miles away, the rubbish team struggled to cope with clearing the arena between the shows, the police believed that 200,000 people had turned up each night, Sainsbury's lost 150 trolleys and Tesco's 75% of their stock, and Lord Cobbold, owner of Nebworth House, ended up in court. In the crowd was a whole generation of people that hadn't been to a concert this large and would be the only time they would see Zeppelin perform live. It was a special performance, but one that was sadly marred by nerves and rustiness. The band's performance was subpar, and any encouragement from fans about Zeppelin's future was halted by the shocking death of John Bonham. Bonham was found dead at Page's house in Windsor. He had downed 4 quadruple vodkas for breakfast the day before. The band's planned North American tour was cancelled, and brief rumours of a replacement drummer were snuffed out when the remaining members decided to disband, releasing the statement, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were." After Bonham's death, it became clear that Led Zeppelin hadn't just lost a drummer. He was so much more than that, touted by many as the greatest of all time. Due to contractual commitments and tax demands, the band were forced into releasing one final album to conclude their discography. Coda was released in 1982. It was a collection of Zeppelin outtakes and unreleased tracks from the span of their 12-year career. The album was also a way for the band to tackle the relentless bootleg versions of their material that was a constant issue over the years. Although it was an assortment of odds and ends, there were some tracks to be enjoyed. Bonzo's Montreux was recorded at Mountain Studios in Montreux in 1976 and was intended as a showcase for Bonham's drumming ability, which Page later treated with various electronic effects. Or the rip-roaring Wearing and Tearing, recorded in Sweden in 1978, reportedly a response to the growing punk movement and a demonstration that Zeppelin could compete with the up-and-coming bands. The years following Led Zeppelin's dissolution saw the members pursue other projects, but, of course, none would find the same level of success as they did altogether. There was a ham-fisted reunion at a Live Aid concert in 1985, featuring Phil Collins and Tony Thompson sharing drum duties, but it was a poor performance. The same could be said of another reunion in '88 with Bonham's son, Jason. Over the years, a variety of re-releases, remasters, concert films and photo books would come out, and a rift between Page and Plant and Jones became apparent, as the former two would exclude the bassist from certain reunion projects, which prompted Jones's cheeky remark during the group's Hall of Fame induction in '95.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to add also my thanks to Peter Grant, who gave us the freedom to do what we did, and also thank you, my friends, for finally remembering my phone number. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Looking back, Led Zeppelin's musical trajectory across their discography is fascinating. It's evident that their early work is firmly rooted in blues and subverting blues with rock inflections, but they incorporated elements from a variety of different genres into their sound as well: funk, Eastern music, rock and roll, reggae, folk, and country. They were labelled one of the originators of hard rock and heavy metal, despite band members disliking the term. Along with Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, they were referred to as the unholy trinity of British hard rock, but music scholars have cited that critics struggled to position Led Zeppelin within the broader context. Chris Gow wrote in 1972, "What is most striking about all art rock is that it isn't very sexy. Bands like Tull made head music using the physical compulsion of beat and volume to involve the mind. Bands like Led Zepp, on the other hand, make body music of an oddly cerebral cast, arousing aggression rather than sexuality. This means that the second kind of English hard rock is a strange potential double audience. It can attract intellectuals and it can attract working class kids." When you look at the individual members and how they contributed to the overall style and direction of the band, you realise this was a unique coming together of four talented, visionary individuals. Jimmy Page was the creator and facilitator, without whom there'd be no Zeppelin to talk about. As Rick Rubin says, Jimmy Page revolutionised everything. There was no real blues rock in that bombastic way before Zeppelin. His songwriting spawned some of music's most lasting compositions. His guitar could be crunching or delicate, and his vision was singular, decisive, and destined for success. Robert Plant and his remarkable vocals were able to adapt different genres and energies. He drew inspiration for his lyrics from mythology, legends, the occult, and wrote some beautifully evocative passages. John Paul Jones, the most overlooked of the group, was distinguished in his own right. He was dexterous, imaginative, and astoundingly good at creating rhythmic tension and tonal complexity with his bass and keys parts. And John Bonham, a game changer who had it all: speed, power, technique, feel, innovation. In many people's eyes, he is and will forever remain the greatest drummer to ever live. Beyond just the music, it's the Led Zeppelin mythos that will help the band live on forever in the collective consciousness. They represent the 60s, 70s zeitgeist, where the ultimate experience would be to attend one of their record-breaking, exuberant live performances and witness their godly presence. The hair, the outfits, the airplane, the ridiculous stories like the one about Bonham allegedly having bought 28 cars in the first year and a half of the band's existence. This excerpt from Robinson's article further speaks to the band's conscious attempts to create that mythos. Led Zeppelin were aware that when the Rolling Stones walked into a room, they created an ambience. So when Zeppelin went to a club, Richard Cole called ahead to say the band was on its way and to make sure that bottles of Dom Perignon were waiting at the tables. In case you weren't already convinced by the band's impact, according to the Recording Industry Association of America, Led Zeppelin are the third highest selling band and the fifth highest selling music act in the US, and one of only 4 acts to earn 5 or more diamond albums. They achieved 8 consecutive #1s on the UK album charts and a record for most consecutive UK #1 albums shared with ABBA. Led Zeppelin remain one of the greatest acts of all time. So we've made it to the end of this Led Zeppelin biography. I hope you've enjoyed it and can take something away from it. This was quite an ambitious undertaking for me that required a lot more work than usual, so please do support the channel by liking, commenting and subscribing. Thank you.